Welcome to the Putback with Ian Begley here on SNY.TV. I'm Ian Begley, SNY's NBA insider, and we're here to break things down. Knicks, draft, offseason, coaching search, the whole thing. For the next 30 or 40 minutes, we're joined by a fantastic guest today. Newsday's Steve Popper has covered the Knicks for a long time, travels with them. With him all the time, so he has great insight into what's going on, what's coming, and what's happened, and we're really excited to get started. And as always, we will get started with the baseline. Baseline now is our head coaching search, and where are we on the coaching search? What's the timeline? Who's in? Who's out? And what can we expect going forward here? So, Steve, I want to start with you with Taylor Jenkins and Mike Brown. Did you hear anything on those interviews and how they went?
Look, I think everything is sort of a process. That's what I keep hearing, due
Yeah.
diligence, and I think we hear every one of these interviews goes well, and they should. Like Mike Brown is a qualified candidate. Taylor Jenkins did a good job in Memphis. These are guys who are well respected. Mike Omori got added to the list today. All good candidates. Are they all an upgrade from Tom Thibodeau? Are they a guy, a reason that you fire a guy who got you to the Eastern Conference Finals? I'm not sure it's a good sell, and I think that's part of the problem here for the Knicks is, when you make a move like this, I kind of wrote in a column I think a week ago, you can make a trade a star player. You want to be able to tell your fans, your base, that next day or that day, we're bringing back this guy. This is why we did it. This is what we have coming. To fire a guy who's done what Thibodeau did, you really have to have a good answer of this is what, we knew when we got rid of him, we had this coming in. And the feeling I've gotten all along from everyone I talked to is Jason Kidd was that guy. He was the one guy they considered an upgrade, a good fit for this team where they're at now. And just now that it's sort of, still in limbo, I think every day it ticks on, everyone gets a little bit more questions in their head. Why did we do this? You start seeing Dick Vitale and other people start saying maybe the right thing is to call Thibodeau back. Obviously that's not happening. But you just feel like if you're going to make a move like that, you've got to have a good answer right away. And due diligence now, to me, is different than due diligence in 2020 when you were coming out of a disastrous period and just setting up your team. I just think it's a different situation.
Yeah, it is totally different. I would add to the Jason Kidd list that you mentioned. I would add Emmy Award. I think he was a guy who, maybe there was a wedge in there that they could have exploited. Obviously, that wasn't the case. And Chris Finch too, with Minnesota. I would put him there with Kidd. And the Kidd thing is going to be interesting until it's not. He's going to be, in my mind, a candidate until he puts pen to paper and signs an extension with the Dallas Mavericks, because this is where it's sat for a while now. I don't think anybody, Steve, anybody who's covering this thing has closed the door on Jason Kidd. And then the reason for that is, we know the Knicks like him. I can't speak for Jason Kidd, but I know how he felt about his time playing in New York with the Knicks. And I would assume that, coaching here is an enticing proposition. So until the Mavs come out and say, we've extended Jason Kidd, he's not going anywhere. To me, he's a candidate, and I know he's a candidate. So that's where this thing turns. If Jason Kidd does do that, where do you go? Do you go Mike Brown? Do you go Taylor Jenkins? I mean, it's going to be interesting because this thing to me hinges on Dallas and how long can you wait there for the owners to react and put something together for Kidd.
Well, I think you're right. And to me, the interesting thing about the Kidd situation is, that's a good team there, and you're getting Cooper Flag tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting situation, but everything I hear there is that things are sort of in disarray, and they're losing. They just lost his lead assistant. They let walk with never negotiating with him, and he's going to be associate head coach of San Antonio. I've heard rumors about Jared Dudley leaving. God possibly to Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these things I've heard. If you see his staff falling apart, you haven't negotiated. We saw right away Billy Donovan in Chicago, Ime Udoka. As soon as their names came up, they were getting extension talks with their teams. That hasn't happened with Jason Kidd, and I think he isn't sure what's happening because when you look at it, it's just you're losing your assistants. There's some uncertainty, I think, on the roster. There's some uncertainty about what happened last season with Luka Doncic. It's a strange situation, strange ownership group. It's not like it was when Mark Cuban was sort of an open door guy. Um, I think he's still alive in the mix, and look, as hard as this may be to imagine, the Knicks are the stable organization that he could probably point to as a better situation for him right now.
The thing that's fascinating to me there too, Steve, is they share the same agent. Excel Sports represents, I should say, Jason Kidd and Nico Harrison. Sorry, share the same agent, Excel Sports, and so that just is another wrinkle there to me that's kind of fascinating. And Houston came out through source reporting and said Emmy's not going anywhere. It's not happening. Chicago comes out and extends Billy Donovan. Though haven't seen that one come officially yet. And then Houston extends Udoka. The Mavs declined the Knicks' request to interview, but beyond that they have not come out even through the media and said nothing's happening here. Kid's not going anywhere. Here's our guy. So that also to me is a little bit curious, and it kind of leads me towards what you're saying in terms of maybe Kid not even being sure where things stand. And so that to me is kind of in a big picture sense where things are at. But now with Mike and Nori, and then I assume they'll bring in some other assistants. What's your read there in terms of the likelihood that a guy like Micah could end up with a job?
Well, he's an interesting candidate because he did do some filling in, very well respected, been an assistant a long time. But to me, again, this is a situation. You're taking a team that went to the Eastern Conference Finals, has huge expectations, and so we can see sort of the East has opened up a little bit with injuries. You're going to be the expectation is you win the East. That's what Thibodeau didn't do, and what sort of is on the hook for the next candidate. So to me, to give a guy who's never been a head coach, other than filling in when Finch broke his leg, I have a hard time believing they're going to go that route. I think it's more due diligence. There were other guys who were offered. Sean Sweeney, who we mentioned, one of Dallas's top assistant, was offered an interview and turned it down, and instead took that associate head coaching job. So I think that kind of probably gives you an indication that maybe he didn't feel confident that an assistant was getting this job.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that if their plan A and B has to be, and I think it is, getting a head coach with experience, somebody who's done it before. If you're turning to that assistant and it's going to be his first time on the sideline in that role, I think things have gone very poorly for your coaching search. And what about a resolution? Obviously, they're not going to get this thing done before the draft, which is tomorrow night. But what do you think about a potential timeline, Steve?
I had heard from people that it wasn't going to be done before the draft, but that the ideal scenario was they wanted to have it in place before Summer League, and ideally before that free agency period, because that's going to be a vital thing for them too, to try and add to this roster. When it was Thibodeau, it was easy to say we're gonna try and sell some veteran for some minutes here. We're going to give you an opportunity, take a 1-year deal. We can give you a championship contending team, a good high profile spot for you. But when you don't know who the coach is, it's really hard to pick out who fits. When you don't know what the system is, when you don't know what you're going to be stepping into. And to me, if you don't have a coach in place July 1st, I'm not interested in talking to the Knicks if I'm a 10-year guy in the league. And I'm certainly not taking less money, not knowing who the coach is going to be.
Right. It certainly complicates things on the free agency front. I think similar to you, I don't know if they look at free agency June 30th as a must date to have a coach in place by. The thing that is lingering out there too, and not to connect the two, but the Giannis Antetokounmpo thing, where Shams Charania mentioned yesterday that Giannis holds things close to the vest, and he's still kind of thinking about what he's going to do, and he wants to see what Milwaukee does in free agency. Do you wait that out and if you're a head coach, do you even a potential head coach, do you wait that out to see where he lands? Because obviously, trading for Giannis Antetokounmpo makes it a very different job than it would have been without that trade. So I just wonder how that factors into Giannis. I know he said to an overseas outlet that he wants to go back to the finals with the Bucks, but to me, we haven't seen a full pledge, a full renewing of the vows, so to speak, between Giannis and the Bucks yet. So that to me is interesting as you get closer to free agency. What's your read there, Steve?
I mean, I'm guessing here because the Knicks aren't saying, but to me, everyone in the league is interested in Giannis. But the Knicks have the advantage here, at least in this one scenario, that they're the only ones with a coaching vacancy. So it's not like a coach, like not like Taylor Jenkins is going to say, "I'm going to wait to see if he's interested in the Knicks. Yes, I'm going there. If he's interested in Miami, I'm going there." Whatever it was.
Right.
I think that the coach is not so much a situation. I think your other point though is valid that the Knicks made big moves last summer, um, and probably kicked themselves a little bit now, wondering if maybe we held some of these assets, for a Giannis chase that would have been hard for anyone to anticipate, particularly when they got Lillard last summer, and you thought that this was an all-in effort by the Bucks. Um, I understand why they made the moves they made last summer. I think they probably are kicking themselves a little and probably on hold here, and wanting whatever chips they can push in there, figuring out a way to do it. And I don't, you and I sit here and conjecture about things, but I've seen them do miracle work with the cap,
Yeah.
uh, deals that I didn't think they could make. So I don't rule anything out. Do I think Giannis is coming to New York? I don't. But do I think everyone is, crossing their fingers and hoping there's a way that they could do it? Like every other team in the league, they are.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, all 29 teams, probably even throw Milwaukee in there at this point because of the
Yeah,
uncertainty. So all 30 teams
right.
are at least keeping an eye on that situation. And obviously, for me, it only works if he demands to come to New York and Milwaukee then decides to send him to where he wants to go. Because outside of that scenario, the trade packages other teams could make obviously far surpass what the Knicks could offer. But
Right.
that's a topic probably for another day, maybe for closer to free agency. I'm curious.
Although maybe it's time to offer Thanasis the head coaching job.
There you go. There you go. Thanasis drafted by the Westchester Knicks. Am I right about
Yes.
that? I think he won
Yeah,
the.
we saw him. We did see him here a little bit.
Yeah, great guy, by the way. Really,
Yeah.
really
Yes.
wonderful guy.
Yeah.
Fun to talk to and get to know. I should say this because I didn't say it earlier. We're also going to be taking questions from the audience. We have some in the shoot, but if you have any more, feel free to leave them in the replies, and we're going to get to some of those later in the show. And we want to get hit quickly, Steve, on the finals. I know it's been a couple days now, but obviously some Nick ties. Obi Toppin, Isaiah Hartenstein. Hartenstein getting the ring with OKC, and as you know, that was one of the I think tipping points for him to go leave the Knicks was the idea that he had a chance to win a ring with Oklahoma City, and obviously it worked out that way, and couldn't have worked out better for him. Knicks, I think, still kind of trying to fill that void in several different ways, not just positionally, but just the spirit of that group. Hartenstein being a big part of it, and then you have on the other side Toppin playing a role, and Halliburton obviously going down, unfortunately, with that Achilles injury. What do you think that means for the East as you look at that injury?
Well, I think first of all, the injury, just like the Jason Tatum injury, the Dame Lillard injury, knowing those guys are either out for the whole season or most of the season next year, makes it just so wide open. I think look, Cleveland had the year that they had, best record in the East, and probably come out as favorites again. But they've disappointed regularly in the playoffs. So I don't think anyone considers them some unbeatable force, any sure thing. I think odds makers already have made the Knicks the favorites for next year, which is really odd, not knowing who's coaching or what's happening. The one thing for the Knicks is this year things worked out great. You and I know, and anybody watching knows, Thibodeau milks every bit of blood from the stone with the team. Won 51 games, got to the conference finals, and were pretty good, luckily, with injuries this year. Obviously, Mitch missed most of the year, and then, the Jalen Brunson ankle, late in the year. But for the most part, they didn't have any devastating, big losses of injuries for long periods of time. And, does that happen next year? Does OG Anunoby, his history sort of come into play? Or does he do what he did last year and be out there almost every game? These are things that next coach is going to have to consider in expectations. That can they live up to what they were this year, or was that the absolute ceiling for this team?
Yeah, and also to me, where does Orlando end up? How big of a jump do they take with the Desmond Bain trade that they made? That's a
Yeah.
pretty good team on paper,
And,
and
and Detroit, we saw in the playoffs,
yes,
are a hard team to play.
yes, and they're not going anywhere. And then we saw last night Boston sending out Drew Holiday to Portland. To me, that's one of a few moves that the Celtics are likely to make here, as they, I think, try to just shed some money because that tax
Yeah,
bill becomes so onerous for that new ownership group. It's just crazy. Porzingis' name, Kristaps Porzingis' name, has been bounced around a lot. The thing that I
yeah,
wonder there with Boston and the money is like, do you re-sign Al Horford? Can you re-sign Al Horford? If you can't re-sign Al Horford, would he consider taking less money? That what the Knicks exception, would he consider that to come to New York? Obviously, we know the relationship with Karl Towns. Towns saw him as a mentor, even going way back to their days on the Dominican national team when Towns was very young. So that's
yeah.
kind of what I look at with Boston and the money situation, just from a Knick perspective. What do you see, Steve?
Well, I think free agents, they're going to have to see a reality and let people go. Because I was talking to somebody about this in the league earlier. It's, you know, we've all heard Kristaps' name, but business is so hard for them because they don't need to just lose his 30 million in a trade. If they bring 30 million back, they're in the same situation. They
Right.
need to find holes in other people's caps. Um, it's real tough. I mean, I think they were entering this offseason looking at a over $500 million tax bill. And I think, when new ownership takes hold, that is not something they want to do, be a repeater on this second apron. They've got a long way still after the holiday deal to get out under it, and very restrictive ways to do it. So I think any of the free agents, I think Luke Cornett, Horford, I think any of those guys are probably long shots to stay in Boston, and you start finding holes where, roster spots where they can fit. Big men, I think, are at a little bit of a premium this offseason in a way they haven't been lately. We've seen teams kind of looking for that, rim protecting defense, which I think is interesting to the Knicks with what they do with Mitchell Robinson in the final year of his contract. And as we talk about help that they can get, they could open up room if they move Mitch. It's a pretty good chunk of money that they can move with him in an expiring contract. I think that's something worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah, and then they could get underneath that first apron, I believe, which gives you access to that bigger exception. I think that
Yeah,
exception would start at 14 million, as opposed
yeah,
to where they currently are with the $5 million exception. And a few days back, the day of Game 7, Kevin Durant moved to Houston. You had reported it, and I'd been saying it. I never thought the Knicks were in there in a serious way. I know that there was, I think, some reports from ESPN that the Knicks were interested and were one of the suitors, but I never got the sense that that was going to be a real thing, that they were actually going to give up what it took to get him and then extend him. So your thoughts there on how that played out for Durant?
yeah. There's not a lot of openness among the Knicks front office, but that was one I heard
Yeah,
pretty openly that they were not going to be a bidder for him. And look, it didn't make sense. As great as Kevin Durant is, and he's still amazing and still great at his age, but the injuries, the possibility when you get at this age, it just and what they would have to give up again, locked in by the apron, by the CBA, they were going to have to give up a lot of talent, either a Carl Anthony Towns or multiple players, starting with either a Bridges Anunoby kind of player, and then something else maybe like Robinson. It was going to be a huge ask for them to get in the bidding on that. and I got the sense they were never interested at all.
Yeah, the extension piece to me is interesting because that's where obviously if you're Durant, you want to go somewhere that they're going to sign you for that 3-year deal, whatever it may be. And I guess there hasn't been much reporting on the Rockets yet in terms of extending, but I know like a lot of the teams that had interest in Durant, I think the Timberwolves included, were wary of that extension, the idea of giving him that full 3-year extension and having him play into, I guess, what would it be, late 30s. Obviously, he's going to be able to score until he loses his driver's license. But you worry about a guy kind of breaking down, and you're giving him
Right.
that kind of money at the end of his career. It's a risky proposition. And obviously, Houston willing to roll the dice. Ime Udoka, who we mentioned earlier, gets his guy in Durant. And for the Knicks, they do have some kind of end of the roster business to take care of. There's a team option for PJ Tucker, which I don't know what you think, Steve. I think they're going to decline it because if you want to bring him back, you could do so on a smaller deal. So I would assume that that's the case. What's your read there?
That's what I had written earlier, was that possibility of doing it on a cheaper deal. Um, One, you didn't use him at all this year, so I don't know if you even want him. He is respected in the locker room. He is that kind of guy, and maybe the next coach does find some use for him. But what I've heard is that they could pick up the option and use that as part of a trade package,
Right.
as a possibility. So I have heard some rumblings about that, possibly getting it picked up to use it as a chip.
Yeah, I think that was the idea with the team option. If there's something there, the other thing from a trade perspective is when do you extend Mikal Bridges? If you extend him, let's say you do it on June 29th, June 30th, then you cannot trade him for 6 months. So you're talking about a significant trade. If you see the Knicks go ahead and extend Bridges and he puts pen to paper June 30th, July 1, you could pretty much count them out. I think on a significant deal for a star. Obviously, Towns is tradable at any time, but that to me also is something to keep an eye on. But where are you on Landry Shamet? You think he's a guy who comes back, who they discard? I mean, I know that Tom Thibodeau was a big proponent, supporter of Shamet. So now without Thibodeau there, I think it's less likely that he's back. What's your read there?
Well, exactly what you said. We just don't know because we knew what Thibodeau felt about him.
Mm-hmm.
And him being injured early and fighting his way back through it. I think Thibodeau felt that there was a spot for him next year. Who knows now? And on the Bridges thing, the one thing I've said all along is that's interesting is with him, it's the Knicks front office has shown if they don't want to extend you, they're not letting you get to free agency and walk. They're gonna find a way to get what they can for you and make a deal. And they did it with Emmanuel quickly. They did it with Julius Randle. They did it with Obi Toppin.
Yep.
Guys that they didn't want to, if they didn't want to give that extension that they felt it was going to cost, they move you. So I don't know. I felt all along that maybe that was going to be the case with Bridges this summer, but the price they paid for him, I'm a believer. After years of watching the league, that sunk cost theory of economics. Don't worry about what you paid for him. If he's not part of your future, make the move and get what you can. But I think that one, a new coach coming in, two, some of the things he did in the postseason, I think maybe portends that the future will be better for him than much of the regular season was. So I think that's worth watching. I just can't. We can't get a sense of all these things until we know who the coach is, what they value.
Yeah, that is definitely the tricky part. And with that, we're going to get into some of your questions. Some of the audience has submitted some questions, and our friend Matt Spenley, the Big Spen, is going to join us to give us some of those questions. And Steve and I are going to get into it. Matt, how are you?
What's up, guys? Doing well. Hope everyone's staying cool today. You guys able to stay cool? Feeling all right?
No. Very, very warm.
I was only doing this indoors. I would have liked to do it from about the 7th hole on a golf course, but not today.
No, we appreciate you, Steve. We need our good friend Burman a couple years ago in the Florida sun would have been a nice addition to the show today.
That's right.
Steve, I want to come to you first because you had mentioned Mitchell Robinson. So I'm going to combine a couple questions here from our guy, Eddie Brown, and Triple M, what's up, Triple M on Twitter. Eddie is asking, with the Daniel Gafford extension, do you think the Knicks could look to sell high on Mitchell Robinson? So Gafford just signed a 3-year, about $60 million extension with Dallas. And then Triple M's asking, what is Mitchell Robinson's trade value? Is it possible to get a starting shooting guard level player for Mitch, or are the Knicks leaning towards keeping him? So let's talk about Mitch and how the Knicks are approaching him as an expiring contract heading into the offseason.
Yeah, again, the same thing we said with Bridges, that you've got to decide what the future is. You know, he can be an unrestricted free agent after the season. Do you want to go long term with a guy who was very productive in the postseason, but has a injury history that is just horrific? Right now, his value is probably about as good as it's going to be. He had a great playoffs defensively, rebounding. He's still fairly young, and he's not super expensive. With the sense that I get more is not just that they might want to move him. It's one, do you want to extend him? And two, as we talked earlier, freeing up some cap space. If they can make a move where they bring him into a deal without bringing back the $14 million, that sort of frees them up some space to do different things, free agency wise, trade wise, that I think they'd be interested in doing. And I do think there's some confidence that the guys they have behind them, that Ariel Hukporti is a guy who can do some of the things Mitch does, not as well defensively, maybe not as well rebounding, but better offensively. Again, how the coach values offense in a center is a different thing. Thibodeau, we know, preached over and over again, rim protection, rebounding, as important things. Will the next coach want a guy who can do sort of what Hartenstein could do? He could play off him as a play initiator.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Porty, we'll see what his role is. Ian, do you think, with Mitch, off of what Steve said too, do you think that the Knicks are viewing it as a piece that could be reallocated depending on how a coach or the front office wants to organize the team this year? Or would they just like to have Mitch at that price that they have? So I guess just generally, how much do you think his role with the team and the future with the team matters compared to just this year, this expiring contract?
Well, the interesting thing that I had heard, at least not on the Knicks side, but more so on the player side, was that their expectation was they were going to be here, and this was kind of what their read on the situation was. Now, this was maybe a week ago, so things are fluid. But I did find that interesting when I was checking in just around the league. The thought around Robinson was that, hey, we're here, we're not going anywhere. So that to me, tells you a little bit about maybe what the Knicks are thinking. But obviously, if you're going to shed salary, if you're going to try to make that kind of a move, Robinson is the obvious candidate. I just don't know. I guess you would be doing that for what? To get under that first apron, to have that bigger exception available to you. I'm not sure of in a real sense, like how much upside there is just to dumping his salary off. But like Steve said earlier, Knicks pulling off a trade that no one thought they could pull off in the Karl Towns move. So I'm not going to question the wisdom of the number crunchers and the CBA guys over there.
Yeah, they've tended to have the measures there.
The one thing I'd add to what Ian said is, when a player believes they're going to be here, all I remember is Julius Randle breaking ground at the Earl Monroe School last year, getting a court named after him, and being very upset later on, finding out that they already knew he was on the way out, and he thought he was here long term.
That was a wild one. The whole front office was there. Once I saw that, I was like, all right, maybe I could relax a little bit. I thought he might get traded, but there's no way after this. And then there we were.
Life comes at you fast. All right, Steve, back to you, because it's something we've talked about here, and I'm curious how you feel. I'm going to use a question from someone here to kind of tee this up. So Jason Kopp 16, how likely are free agents like Luke Kennard, Malcolm Brogdon, who we've talked about on the show, Spencer Dinwiddie, et cetera, when the team can't offer big money to role players? So I'm curious for you, we've talked about the lack of a coach and how that might impact the type of players they end up signing. So I'm curious if you think that will have an impact on a real level, or if you think the front office will kind of want to build the team in their image and the type of player that they might look to target.
Well, one of the things you just worded there is an interesting thing that I mentioned in my column today. Is the next coach his own man? Is the next coach just implementing a plan that maybe the analytics people feel is the way we're going to play it, and is sort of a yes man and a front man for it, versus a coach who is going to play his own style. If it's a coach who's his own free thinker, I'd have a hard time as a player. My dog absolutely agrees with that. Dude, he's very much against signing without knowing the coach. To me, it's. I think if you want to be a player, we knew when Thibodeau was here. You could kind of say, this is what my role is. This is what I'm going to get. This is what is valued on this team. I just think we just don't know now. And to me, the scary part is if a player signs and without knowing the coach, that probably is a bad indication that coach is going to be a guy who's going to be able to think on his own and implement his own plans, which seems to never work out. And poor Jeff Hornacek, R.I.P. his time here in New York, when he had to try and do the triangle unwillingly.
Those were fun times. I forgot about that. And with Thibodeau, it was always, I don't want to say always, but, a large percentage of the time when they're making a move, it was his Tom playing this guy, his Tom in favor. He had a big voice in terms of a lot of the things they did and did not do. And so maybe just because logic tells you they fired Thibodeau, so logic tells you maybe they want to go away from that. Maybe they do want a little bit more control or, synergy or less pushback, whatever you want to call it, with this next coach. I think you guys bring up an interesting point about how the potential free agents do fit the coach and what the coach says there and what kind of a role he plays there, because Thibodeau had a big one.
Sure. Our guy, Billy Bear, on the same topic. I'm curious because it's reminding me, we obviously cover baseball very closely here, and a big topic whether they think baseball becomes front office building the team more in its image, and then the manager is there to assign all of the pieces and play the game accordingly, right? So Billy is asking, with the OKC win, do you see a shift to a progressive analytical focus with all teams like in MLB? Are the Knicks ahead of the curve? So I think, a sense of around the league, how much that kind of matters. Do you think maybe if there's been any big takeaways from OKC winning and just how they approach team building? Ian, what do you think?
The big takeaway is to find a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander type and to have a veteran who's getting close to 30, who a team still wants, and fleece the team for the trade. I think that's the big takeaway. No disrespect at all to the analytics guys. And I do think the Knicks, they have a robust analytics group. And I think if you look at kind of shot profiles year over year and for individual players, and what Thibodeau would talk about in press conferences, I do think that they have influence. They're using the analytics and they're not ignoring it in any way. I think the numbers guys, men and women, and the message that they have with their numbers or how they're interpreting the numbers, I think you do see that on the floor with this team, maybe not in a way that's as publicized as a baseball, with the A's way back when, but I do think it is a factor in what they do.
And I'll add to that, having covered baseball, I love the movie Moneyball, but they left out a lot of important things in that movie. A lot of the great analytical moves didn't actually win them. What they did there, they also had 3 of the best pitchers in the game, the MVP in the steroid era. There's a lot beyond finding somebody who walks a lot.
Steve, why let the facts get in the way of a good story, man? Come on.
The movie didn't, so we shouldn't, right?
It was a great book and a great movie. I love it.
It is fantastic. So we can cool, but it's pretty good. All right, Steve, I want to come back to you with one. Our guy, Akiva Kivi 015. Do you think any of the players from the 24 draft have a chance to be in the rotation next season? So I know when you've been on the show earlier, we've spent some time talking about Tibbs, and a guy like Tyler Kolek that had struggled to defend at a high level was just never going to really be able to carve out a role. We've obviously talked about Huck Porty, given that the Knicks, their salary cap situation, all the things that going into the offseason. What are the odds that you think one of those players could emerge and be a rotation player as the season goes on?
Well, I think that's something that the next coach probably in his interview should stress, because I know there was some voices in the organization that weren't happy about that they didn't have bigger roles, as finger pointing happens, in the organization. And, I guess people want to justify their decisions. So I think playing them is something they should promise. I think we'll know more in the summer league coming up. We'll see how these guys have developed. They're all interesting to me. I think Ariel Hukporty had some good moments last year, and showed hints of a guy who could be a backup center in the league. And as I said earlier, I wouldn't be shocked if he took Mitch's role, in that rotation if they move Mitch. I think Pacome Dadier is an interesting guy. He's a lot of offensive talent, good size, strong. He's still so young. Ideally, I don't think there was ever a plan to use him much last year. And Kolek is an interesting guy. He's a very good ball handler. His assist to turnover numbers when Brunson were out were great. He's got to figure out a way to get stronger, or to do the things Jalen Brunson does. Jalen Brunson is a much stronger, sturdier physique than him, but Jalen knows how to use his body. He knows how to draw charges. He's always in the right position. Just to get to that level of being a defender, I think if Kolek can do that, I think he could be a regular contributor. And I think they need those guys to be, because there's one draft pick this year and they may not even use it. So, we'll see.
Those are the tough choices that a team in the Knicks position has to make. We've seen over the years teams that are spending at this level are going to have to make tough calls. Ian, I want to come to you with a specific name from our guy, Baby Chrissy23 on Twitter. Is Malik Monk a name the Knicks could show interest in? Feel like he would be a perfect fit as a secondary ball handler. So Monk's under contract for 3 more years, has a player option for about $21.5 million in 27-28. And I always think these conversations are important to couch, given that a lot of the trades are difficult for the Knicks at this point, given their salary cap position, where they're at, matching salaries. All these different things are part of the apron and make things challenging. But for a type of player like Monk at that contract level, Chrissy's asking if the Knicks could have interest in that.
Yeah, look, the interesting thing to me there is Scott Perry, former Knick GM, taking over in Sacramento. And obviously when a new regime comes in, a lot of the times some of the guys who are part of that old regime are on their way out. And so could Monk be had in a trade? I don't know that, but I do think that if you're putting that kind of salary together to make a deal, I would assume if you're the Knicks, you want a player that's going to make a more consistent impact than Malik Monk. That's just a guess on my part. But I do think that with Sacramento, I think a lot of those veterans, at the very least, you can have conversations with the Kings because of the regime change and Scott Perry looking to put his imprint on things. And I would say this, I do remember with Perry and Steve Mills that there was some interest in Monk. So maybe that tells you a little bit about how Perry values Monk. I do know there was some interest way back then. And so, again, you're putting salary like that together to make that kind of a trade. I would assume it's a bigger name, more consistent player coming back.
Sure. Monk, 17 points a game last year. Like you said, has been in the league since 2017, not displayed a high level of consistency, but I think the type of player generally is, what a lot of the fans have been asking about. Steve, I want to come to you because you talked about Mikal Bridges earlier, and our guy, Andrew Guerrero on YouTube, is asking how likely are the Knicks going to extend Bridges. So we've talked about Bridges' extension eligible status going into the season. You had talked about it before. So your feel on the Bridges situation, and if the Knicks did decide to go a different direction, why they might make such a decision?
Well, I think the contract is the thing. Do you want to tie yourself up to I think what right now is a 4-year 156 is the max he can get right now. And look, maybe he negotiates a less expensive deal. I'm not sure he would do that when he's looking at possible free agency next year. To me, I thought he had his moments on both ends of the court in the playoffs. And I guess if I'm a gambling man in the front office who put a lot of chips on the table for him, I'd say, look, that's the guy we got. And without Thibodeau, we're going to get more out of him. And maybe you do it, and that's a reasonable price for a guy who plays every game. But if they don't, I would think we'll see something this summer happen. If not, because I don't think they'll let it ride to next year. It just hasn't been what they've shown their purpose with these things. They want to make a move and not take that to the end.
Of course. So we'll keep an eye on Bridges and how they approach that. Ian, I want to ask you one about the coaches, because I know you guys were talking coaches before, and I want to circle back. Something that you talked about when we did an episode last week was about the experience level of coaches and how the Knicks will have to have a coach that's going to have experience at this level. You guys had mentioned Nori before. He's not a guy that has a level of experience that we've discussed. Do you think there's any universe in which the Knicks could decide that a guy like Nori is the type of coach they'd want to target, and then they bring on a very experienced staff behind him? We've seen other NBA teams do that. Do you think that that's something that they could eventually decide, knowing that you've talked a lot about the experience factor?
I'd be surprised if it ended up that way. But the one thing, Matt, when you ask about Nori and then interviews, I think the interview process matters in a big way. And I always kind of assume when these coaching searches happen that people have a top candidate in mind, and he's always there in the background. And there are other guys who interview are kind of break the glass in case of emergency. But in this case, Taylor Jenkins, Mike Brown, the interviews matter significantly. And so if neither guy blows Nick Brass away in the interview process, maybe they go to plan B. And maybe if Mike Nori does really impress the Knicks brass, and I don't know when owner James Dolan gets involved, but if that's the case, maybe he does leapfrog these guys. But I would be really surprised, though, if that were to be the case, if they went with a first-time head coach over the experienced candidates that they've already talked to, and the names that we've talked about earlier in the show with a kid and everybody else.
Steve, you come from the same place when it comes to the experience too? You have that same feel?
I do, and the one thing I think, as we've talked about timeline, I think for the Knicks front office, it's important in a lot of ways for the Knicks to get a coach in place. But the one thing I would say about the patience, they could have had a great interview with Mike Brown or Taylor Jenkins, and maybe Taylor is the front runner, who knows. But a normal case, you may get blown away in an interview and you say, we got to lock this guy up before Team X gets in the running here. There is no Team X. So the Knicks can go through this process. Well, I think it's not ideal. They can patiently go through the process. They can still wait on Jason Kidd because they're the only game in town. There's, Taylor Jenkins isn't going anywhere else right now.
Lots to still decide. I want to get to a couple more things because we have the NBA draft later this week. Obviously, the Knicks only have one pick this year. I'm sure you guys can remember a lot of draft nights that were more exciting than the one that's to come. Steve, I want to start with you. Don Juan, 607. This one's for Steve. In your mock, you have the Knicks taking Kobe Bryant. If he's off the board before they pick, is there another prospect you could see them taking a swing on or being interested in?
Again, this is so difficult because, one, if I have a true belief about the draft, it's that the Knicks are going to make me drive to Brooklyn on Thursday for this, wait through the 50th pick, and then they're going to deal it for a future pick so that they don't add any salary on their cap. That's my worst case scenario, and I fear it might be the one that comes true. Look, there are some other names, guys, that I thought about putting there who we don't know if they're going to go 35 or they're not going to go drafted. Jameer Watkins from Florida State is a similar profile, a guy who can play two ways. And again, I'm thinking in my head how the team played this year, what Thibodeau valued. A guy who can play defense, who can shoot from the outside. I saw a couple times Tyrese Proctor from Duke. He's another guy who I think will go a little bit higher, but possibly could be there. And the history of this Knicks front office is they never take the pick that is in front of them. That they're always, that they're going to trade from 50 to back to 52 plus 56, then up to 48, and then we're going to be scrambling, writing ridiculous things and tweeting things that don't matter. It's going to move all around. And I think ultimately they may move out of the draft.
So keep the notifications on, everyone, so you know what's going to happen.
Yeah,
it's going to be bouncing around. That's how it's going to go.
I'm gonna text Woj and ask him, come back for one night. We might need you.
If there's one night, that's got to be the one. It's got to be the one to come back. Ian, just on the draft, so we can get your take on it too. Our old friend Max Fucci Main, do you see the Knicks trading up in the draft or making a move of any kind, standing pat? So just generally, any other additional thoughts with the draft tomorrow and Thursday this week?
I don't see them moving up. Several reasons. One is because of where they are in the team building process. They're trying to win. You need win now players. Also, you're adding more salary to your books if you move up, particularly in the first round. And so I can't see that happening. I would assume that, whatever they do, the player at 50 or wherever that player ends up, or wherever they end up picking, I should say, ends up being a two-way deal just for cap reasons. That's the easiest way to add that kind of a player. I do know that I think it was on Monday they brought in Rutgers / Alabama product Cliff Omori, a big guy, 6'11", 7'6" wingspan. He was well liked at Alabama. He was up there for a workout earlier this week. We talked about them having the depth at center. But they did bring him in to take a look. He was part of a multiplayer workout. So that's something to note as we get towards Thursday. I guess it'll be late Thursday night when the Knicks make that pick.
We'll keep an eye on all those guys. There'll be names thrown around, and like you guys said, who knows what will happen. Might be driving home without much in the holster. But that's what I got today. You guys stay cool. All right? Be safe. Drink water. All that good stuff. Wear sunscreen too.
Oh, man. Well, Steve, thank you so much, man. Really appreciate your time and your insight. That's going to do it for us, but keep an eye on Steve Popper's work in Newsday and on Twitter. I think, what are you, Steve? STPO?
It's
oh, no, you're Steve Popper. You are Steve
it's
Popper.
Really hard to figure out.
At Steve Popper. Keep an eye on him there. As for us, we will be back with you at some point before free agency starts, I believe, to kind of set the table there, maybe react to some Knick moves, and we'll see where things go from here with that coaching search too. So thank you for being with us, and we hope to see you then.